Hi there, this is John Lebensold for KillerPHP.com, and this is the 7th and final part of an introduction to jQuery. And we're going to be looking at how we can create objects in PHP and then pass them to jQuery, and then have jQuery do all the styling and the effects and all that fun stuff that we've been doing over the last 7 or over the last 6 videos. So in order to do this, I'm going to be starting with the introduction or the introducing JSON HTML file that we did in the last video, and the request.php file that we did 2 videos ago. And also I'm going to be opening the project that we did, I'm going to be looking at the project that we did where we did an introduction to, we did an Ajax with PHP. So this was Ajax with PHP. I don't know if you remember it, but basically we had a submit form. I'm just going to open it right now. It was Ajax with PHP. You could submit the form and then it would tell you username not found, or if you put in J Smith, then you would get John Smith with the username and all that fun stuff. So we're going to extend this project with the tools that we've learned in the last video, where we've basically looked at JSON and now we're all JSON experts. So we're going to be looking at how we can basically merge these 2 bits of learning and move away from what would be considered, I guess, classical Ajax, where you ask the server for a template, to looking at the server more as a web service or a way of servicing you with data and giving us data that we can then manipulate in any form that we want, whether that's in XML or whether that's in JSON, if we're creating an RSS feed, or if we want to pass it or combine it with other data sources or what have you in the browser. So this is a great way of doing that. Let's get started. So to begin with, I'm going to be looking at what we've already done in the last couple tutorials. And we're going to be looking at the back end, and we're going to be working forward. I think that's generally a good way of starting this particular kind of project. So we've already created these functions, get template and get full name. Now I'm going to get rid of the get template function because I don't think we're going to be using that anymore. And the get full name function, basically it's not doing anything particularly fancy, but we do need all that list of names. So we're just going to keep that for now. We'll probably look at that a little later. I'm also going to change how we access the username from get to post. And this is just to show you that they are really interchangeable for small data sets. For larger data sets, you do need to consider using post, because post is a lot more friendly for larger data sets if you've got lots of variables that are going back and forth from the client and the server. Also, Google and other search engines will not cache post variables like they do get variables, since they don't appear on the URL line. So, without further ado, we're going to create a class. And that class is going to be called person. And then I'm going to create another class called permissions. And permissions is going to have a couple public variables. One's going to be admin. It's going to be called false. Public user, which is going to be also, we'll just call this one, we'll set this one to false, and we'll say public guest, and we'll say this one's true. Now in person here, I'm going to have some public properties, and this is very important for when we want to send this data over the wire. You'll notice that I'm using the same variable names that we saw in the last video, except now we're representing the same data, but in PHP. And lastly, I'm going to create a static function which will let us create a new person with some healthy defaults. So you give me a first name, a last name, and a list of email addresses, and I will give you a new person. We want the ID to be unique, and we're just mapping the parameters to the object. So we're creating a new person object, and then we've got a whole bunch of public properties, and we're just assigning them some information. If this looks a little new to you, then again, you can always look at the killer PHP tutorials on objects. Again, they're fantastic. And then for permissions here, we're going to do something a little different. We're going to create a new object called permissions. Permissions. And lastly, we're going to return our new person object. So we've got two classes. We've got a person class and a permissions class. And we've got this get full name business over here, which is going to have to change. And I think that's about it. So instead of get full name being basically just getting us this full name of a person, actually let's use this, but we're just going to return false in the event that we can't actually get the full name of a person. Now let's go back up here. So we've grabbed the person's username, and what we want to return is a JSON-friendly version of the person class. So I want to say, we're going to do some assignment within the if statement. So we'll say full name is equal to get full name of a username. So if this returns true, then we'll go into the if statement. If not, then this will return false, and we will not go into the if statement. And in that instance, we'll just create an else statement, and we will return false. So far, so good. Now, normally I would just return false, but we have to make this JSON friendly. So we're going to actually echo JSON encode false. And under full name here, we need to split the full name, because there's a first name and a last name, into the two different properties of our person object. So I'm going to say name split equals explode, which will just split the full name, and we'll just say full name. And then our person object here will be of type person, new person, name split 0, name split 1, and then we'll have an array of email addresses. And we're going to grab our email addresses from our username. So we'll just say that the username comes with an @email.com, and then there'll be another username at company.com. So let's say each user in our company has 2 emails, and they're totally based on the username, and that's it. So we've closed the array, and now we need to close our person object, and that's it. We're done. The last thing I want to do here is I just want to echo JSON encode the actual person. Now what this should do is it will return the person object in JSON encoded format. Now, before we get this all tested and up and running, I need to specify just one last thing. And normally when we send data across from PHP, the default behavior is that the header of the PHP file is actually going to be in HTML format. So the browser knows that it's dealing with HTML. Now, what's important here is that we want to tell the browser that we're dealing with JSON encoded content. And in order to do that, we just have to add a function to the top called header. And we'll just specify that the content type here is application/JSON. And with that done, we should be done our back-end system. And lastly, instead of just echoing uname not defined, I'm also going to do a JSON encode over here as well. And there you go. Okay, let's see. So we've got Ajax with PHP here, and we should be looking at our new project. So we've done the back end, but we haven't even touched the front end yet. So I'm going to start with the introducing JSON HTML file that we did in the last video. And if you want, you can just download this from the tutorial set. But if not, you should have this up and running. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to save this as, we'll call this PHP classes with JSON. And the first thing I'm going to do is change the title. And I've got this person template, which looks good, so I'm not going to touch that right now. I'm going to add a bit of styling to my page because I find it a little bland. So we'll say text/CSS. And what's nice about this too is that our data and our data layer, which is just our request.php file in this example, doesn't need to concern itself with the presentation. So we can present the same data differently on different pages. But the data set is the same, which gives us tremendous flexibility on the front end. Oh, we've got this box, which we're defining up here. Actually, instead of calling this class person, I'm going to call this class box because there is that potential case of the div not being, the div in fact being empty. So I'm just going to give this class a name box. And we'll give it a border, 1 pixel solid, 555. And then we're going to specify some margins on the paragraph, the header 2, and the header 3. And then our header 2 will have a background of 555, and we're going to give it a color of white. And we have these unordered lists in our boxes, which should have some kind of little margin. And that should be it. Okay. Now, instead of there being this get person template, I'm going to revert back to what we did with the Ajax with PHP example, where we had this form that we were submitting. So I'm going to copy what I did with that div and the Ajax response, basically just grabbing the form stuff, and I'm going to bring it back into here. Let me just clean this up a bit. Save that. And if I go back here and I refresh this, we've got Ajax with PHP, get the full name, but we don't have any glue code yet. So we've got our view set up, and we've got our person template, but we don't want to necessarily just keep doing the appending of the static person template. Now we want to do some Ajax, and we want to call our request.php file. So I'm just going to delete this, and we've got this get person template, which I'm just going to fold up. I'm going to fold this up too. And instead of just doing a get TPL click, we're going to be doing this on form submit. So I'll start there. And then we used the Ajax function last time, but there's actually a shortcut if we know we're going to be doing a post back. So if we're going to be doing something of type post, then we just do $post. And this is a shortened, or it's a shortcut for doing an Ajax call. But instead of having to specify the type of type post, we just do $.post. We'll just say $.post request.php, comma, open this up, and now we're going to specify the uname is of type uname.val. And you can see that this is actually just yet another JSON object with a parameter, and then it's delimited by a colon, comma, and then we should get a return which will be some sort of data. So now we're not looking at this as HTML anymore, we're thinking of this in terms of data. We'll open this up, and then we have to close our AJAX response. But before we do, we have to specify the format to expect it in. And I'm going to specify this as JSON. And for now, we're just going to do a console.log of the data and hit save. Let's see what happens. So if I hit get full name here, let's see, then I'm getting uname not defined with the parameter JSON. Oh, I'm on the wrong page. Should be PHP classes with JSON.html. There we go. So if I do jsmith, get full name, oh, we're getting an error here. Request was not found on the server. Oh, it's request.php. There we go, my bad. We do this again. You'll see that we've gone from a GET request to a POST request. And we're getting this object. And I can actually click on it, and I can open this up, and I can see that jsmith@email.com, jsmith@company.com, fname is John, lname is Smith, we've got a unique ID, admin, and it's actually treating this like an object. And we can just kind of query that using Firebug, which is really handy. Now what happens if I put something in that isn't a username, and I say get full name? Then I just get a false. So again, we're dealing with data, which is fantastic. So I can do some validation on the client. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to say if data is equal to false, the template is going to equal get empty template, which we haven't defined yet. We'll do that in a minute. If else, the template is going to be get person template, which we've already defined. We defined it in the last video. And we're just going to pass in the data variable. And instead here, I'm just going to log whatever the template is. Now I need to create that empty template. And that's going to be really simple. It's going to just be, we're just going to return a div of class type box. h2 user not found, close my header 2, and close my div. Let's refresh this again. If I do get full name, then I'm going to get some HTML saying user not found. And if I just put in jsmith, oh, I'm getting p.permissions. Ah, I'm misspelling permissions again. So, PERMI, permissions. You can see that this is really important, that I've got these public properties here and they're actually being defined. Well, that's kind of neat. I'll refresh this again, do a get full name, and I get a different box. And this way it's being defined on the client rather than on the server, which is kind of neat. Lastly, we of course want to do the same kind of fade out trick that we did before. So we'll just do a AJAX response div dot fade out fast, and then we're going to define a callback. And the callback is going to start by removing what already was there. And then we're going to append our template, but before that we're going to wrap it in a jQuery object. We're going to hide it first, and then we're going to fade it in, and that should be it. Let's see what happens. John Smith, user not found, E. Roberts, and there you go. Now, we could also add some business rules to this, and we could do that again on the server instead of on the client. So I'm going to go back to my request.php. Right now, everybody has the same permissions, which isn't very interesting, but we can change that. All we have to do is, if we were storing this in a database, we might store a person's permissions in the database. But again, we want to keep this nice and simple. So let's say people who are named Emily have special permissions in our system. So if person fname equals Emily, then person permissions user equals true. And let's also make them an administrator. So not only is their user permission true, but their admin permission is also true. So if I refresh this again, now she's got admin, user, and guest permissions. You can see her ID is in small underneath her name, and everything seems to be working. And you can see that every single time I run this, I'm going to get a different ID. And that's because we're running the PHP unique ID function. So I hope this tutorial set was interesting. I'd love to hear your comments and your feedback on the Killer PHP forum. And if you have any questions, feel free to post them there and I'll try and get to them as soon as possible. Thanks for listening.